Well, my first experience with horses was, according to my mother, because I don't really recall, I was about 3 years old and went with my mother and her father up in western New York State to a country fair and had a pony ride. They put me in a little western saddle. Well, of course the pony got away, ran around a huge meadow, and finally came back to the herd and stopped. And both my grandfather and my mother were very upset, apoplectic practically, I guess. But I was laughing my head off when they stopped this pony. And after that, my mother said I was just obsessed with horses. I got West Winds when I was 8 years old, and so she was my first horse in terms of competing. And I did start competing fairly early, at age 8, 9, in just, beginner over fences and things like that. She had a gash in her hind leg, and the management there told me, well, don't worry about it, it's a long way from her heart. And I went on a trip with my parents, and we got a phone call that she actually died from an infection. That had a profound effect on me as a trainer and a horsewoman going forward, that even at that age I realized I needed to take responsibility for the care of my horses. I was really very fortunate to have a very supportive family. I was one of 5 children, and for Christmas, my parents gave me a horse named Kid Gray. She wasn't super fancy, but she could do everything. She had a great heart, very honest. And then we saw a film at the Bloomfield Open Hunt one night, and it was something like Ambassadors on Horseback, but it was produced by the US Equestrian Team. I said, that's what I want to do. I want to ride on the team. So I received an invitation from the USET to go to Gladstone in July for a training session with Bert Denemethy. And the instructions included bringing 2 horses, all your equipment, etc., and a groom. Well, of course, I didn't have a groom because I did all my own grooming. And so I called them and said to them, I don't have a groom, but I'll do it myself. And I was told, no, you won't. So I had to recruit my middle brother. He was 6'4" and had never been around horses at all. It was like this crash course training, for him on how to care for horses. And so we got through the trials, and that was my final junior year, and I was invited then to stay on and train with the team. So we went to all the Eastern shows, to Monmouth and Piping Rock and a lot of big shows in the East, and I was showing in the jumpers. Then when it came time to go to the fall circuit, we got to Harrisburg, and Bert decided I should not stable with the US Equestrian Team at the National Horse Show. So I didn't know anybody. The only person I knew coming to the National Horse Show was Max Bonham from Michigan. So I called up Max and said, Max, I have my equitation horse, but I'm going to have to stable him with someone else other than the team. So would you take care of my horse? He said to me, I'd be happy to do that. I'll take good care of him. They'll be braided. He'll be beautifully turned out. But I just want you to remind you that I am not an equitation coach. And I said, don't worry about it. I'll be fine. And so I walked the courses by myself at the finals. I had an incredible weekend. I mean, it was something out of a storybook, really. I won the medal finals on Saturday afternoon, and then I was showing a horse that had been recently donated to the team, a horse named Night Spree, and I showed her on Saturday night at the National and won that, and then turned right around on Sunday morning and won the Maclay finals. So I won 3 classes in a row at the National Horse Show, and nobody, except people close with the team, had ever heard of me or knew who I was. I continued riding with the team, and the next spring we went to Europe and rode with Billy Steinkraus and Frank Chapeau and Mary and Kathy Kuzner and Neil Shapiro and Carol Hoffman. It was an extraordinary team. I mean, and we had an incredible, a couple of years actually, of just dominating competition in Europe. We got to Aachen, and for the parade, we really just sort of blew people away. It was unusual. It became sort of an iconic team that we were able to parade 7 gray horses. So all 7 of us were mounted on gray horses. And it was an incredible sight. There was just tremendous media coverage for being this young girl. Sort of made a big splash there as well too, because the first big Grand Prix I rode in was in Cologne, Germany, and I actually beat Bill Steinkraus on Snowbound and won it. That was a big change in my life, to be under the spotlight. But then I did have to make a decision going forward. For the next quadrennium, did I want to continue training in Gladstone? And I think part of what drove the decision there might have been, I had my 21st birthday at the 21 Club in New York, and my father took over the upstairs dining room. But then he gave me my 3 horses and just said, they're yours. And I thought, oh my God, how am I going to pay the bills? So I immediately had to sell all 3 horses and start thinking about what was I going to do next. So I got a call from Sally Sexton to come ride for her at Brindle Farms in Ohio. But Sally had a great influence on me because she was a big proponent of drug testing, and she was very outspoken about the issues facing our sport. And she really influenced me in terms of getting involved in governance. She was really my mentor in that area. She was a very eloquent speaker and a very bright woman. So that really set my sights on maybe I should go more in the direction of administrative side of the sport. After I returned to Michigan and got my start in course designing in Michigan at the Detroit Horse Show, and later went on to become an international course designer as well, and so I think that started me down the officiating trail, and at the same time people were encouraging me to get my judge's license, and so I started judging in my 20s, and then have been fortunate to again have an FEI license as well, so I have hunter, jumper, equitation. So I've really, had a wonderful career as an official. I got a call to go to Gladstone, that Bert was going to be retiring, and they were looking for someone who could serve as the director of jumping and the training center, and also manage the teams on tour and so forth. So that was an era then of working for the U.S. equestrian team, and I managed 2 Olympic Games, all 3 teams at 2 Olympic Games, 2 Pan Am Games, the show jumping world championships. And we had an extraordinary run as well at that period of time. And of course I was very fortunate to be able to work with coaches like George Morris and Frank Chapeau, and they were really, really extraordinary mentors and great coaches for the team. Obviously I managed the teams at LA. We had an incredible series of wins there with gold medals, and it was just really an amazing run for several years with the team. And then following the Olympic Games in Seoul, Korea, I got a call from Jim Wofford, and he had become president of the AHSA, and he contacted me and asked me if I would come and serve as the executive director at the offices in New York. And out of that came the discovery. I mean, we knew, and we'd been talking about it for years, that we needed to create a separate association for the hunters and jumpers, that the other breeds and disciplines all had their various associations, but the hunter-jumper group had been under the AHSA umbrella from the get-go. But it really became clear during my tenure there that we needed to address this. We had several actually false starts. We tried to create the association a couple of times, and they didn't quite succeed, but it did lead to 10 years later, in 2003, we were able to create the USHJA. After my tenure as executive director, I actually went back to the USET to work on fundraising. And that took me a little bit away from the AHSA and governance side for the years that were sort of the years of turmoil. But out of all of that finally was born the U.S. Equestrian Federation, as we know it. And at that time, then I got a call to come back to them and serve as secretary of the board. But we did a complete change in the governance structure while I was secretary. I think that that was an important time, maybe for me to come in as president and be able to make these changes and create a smaller board with the councils underneath it. And the process continues today. When I went to the team in the early 80s and took over when Bert was retiring, was also an important change in my life, because that's when I met my husband, George Tauber. That was forever life-changing for me to have found somebody who could really be my lifetime partner.
I remember the first time I met Chrystine. You were at Gladstone shooting for the Miller's catalog using riders from the U.S. Equestrian team. And I thought the office had made arrangements with the team on our coming down there and using the facility, except it apparently hadn't worked out, because there was this blonde lady who came flying into the rotunda saying, "What are you doing here with a truck? You can't have a truck in our rotunda." Well, after a few smiles and apologies, we got on with the shoot, and we had a terrific catalog that year. And Chrystine made an impression on me, of course, so I called her a few times to ask her out. But apparently I was somewhat lower in the starting order, and I didn't manage to make that happen until she took the team to Paris, I guess a year or so later. And at that time we were the distributors for the Hermes saddles, and Hermes had a big press and dinner party started at their famous museum on the Faubourg Saint-Honoré. And luckily, Chrystine and I found ourselves together, and that started an adventure until this day. Now, I am a little bit of mixed emotions that she's retiring from her lofty positions in January of 2017, because I used to call her Miss Conference Call. She was very passionate, because one of her great traits is not only a passion, but also an attention to detail, her straightforward honesty, her ability to be kind and yet forceful in getting things done. She is an achiever. She's slightly competitive, I guess. That would be an understatement. And I'm just glad I made the cut.
I've truly had an extraordinary life, and I'm very blessed with the opportunities that I've had, both in the equestrian field and outside of the equestrian field, involved with so many great people. I've had great mentors along the way, great people I've worked with on committees and in governance. And so I hope that in the end, the roles that I've played have truly made a difference.